Pardon? Arthur responded with a hint of offence, looking up from his computer screen from his office, looking at Rutak, who sat herself down, dragging her adjacent office chair closer to Arthur's desk. Well, as my role as a diplomat, I must become acquainted with a species' culture and mannerisms, Rutak replied politely. She did not mean to cause offence, she was simply curious. So much emphasis on the second global conflict on Earth. Being a diplomat was not an easy task, even more so when trying to understand humans. A good indicator of a species' culture is their media, and for humanity it seems very diverse with no one particular theme, except with that of violent conflicts. Glancing through the history books your leaders have provided me, it's clear that the second global conflict, World War II, was the darkest moment in your recorded history, correct? Rutak continued. Yes, many had died and even more had suffered. We found the limits of our humanity in those times. Arthur hanged its head slightly whilst frowning. Well, how come you would want to have so much media covering it? The movies, the books, the neural and computer games? Why would you want to reflect on such a dark time in your history? It seems almost glorifying of those times. Why not forget and move on? Arthur was a collaborative historian, familiar with the history of other species who were willing to divulge information on their history. Most of his work was applying for access to their history documents and waiting on those application. But this question was the most puzzling for him in his entire career so far that made him irrationally irritated. Why do we want to forget? Why wouldn't we want to remember? Arthur exclaimed with a street contempt. To forget would be to doom ourselves to repeating those atrocities again. How do you learn from your mistakes if you willingly forget the consequences of your mistakes? Arthur took a breath while Rutak tried to comment, but was cut off by Arthur continuing his passionate rant. As to move on, we have moved on. Our media covers these events, blooded by the lives lost to human greed and ignorance, not to glorify them, but to ensure that these events are remembered and mourned and are not repeated again. May I ask, what do your people do, Rutak? Do they mourn like we do? Do they remember and reflect the lives lost from your own mistakes in history? Or do they forget and try to move on without remembering or reflecting, making all that suffering and dead in vain? Arthur, calm down, please. It's my job to question and learn. I'm sorry if I struck a nerve with you personally or one of your species. But please, act more professional than this. Rutak responded sternly. Yes, we do mourn, but not for long. We don't like to reflect on our own embarrassing moments in our history. There are quite a few events in my own species' history that many have forgotten, except for a few who specialize in studying them. Most of my friends don't know of them. A few who do don't like talking about them at all. I only know about these events as my job entails I must know. I myself don't like talking about our own interspecies conflicts. Arthur shook his head. If that truly is your species' attitude to your history, then you will be damned to repeat those events, like what's happening now with your leaders trying to push for the expulsion of the Greentext, those verbal pheromone communicating species, and why? I've heard all the possible excuses of subjugation and hate. They're a threat to national security. They're responsible for our economic strife. They're not sentient anyways. It doesn't matter how we treat them. Please stop me if I've repeated what some of your leaders have said. Rutak frowned and closed her scent glands that rested on her cheeks. How do you know all of this? My government hasn't disclosed the existence of Greentext to the galactic public yet, alone their stance on them. I'm sorry if the words of my leaders upset you. If it helps, I don't think the way the Greentext are being treated is even remotely right. Arthur turned his chair to face the small bookshelf on his desk. It was flooded with books of old. Arthur removed a single, yet thick, paper-laminated book from the shelf and slid it across to Rutak. For every foul deed that leaves a stain on this world, and despite the sins of weaker men, there will be someone left to clean up their mess. Rutak took the book, looked at the cover, thanked Arthur for his response, and went back to her desk. Whilst writing her report and her progress on summarizing human media for her superiors, she glanced again at the cover of the book. Then, Morris Gleitzman. Reading through the book with saline secretions streaking down her scent glands and sadness weighing her heart and mind, Rutak reached the end of this journey. After her decade of work as an ambassador, no other works of media or literature had reached out and touched her like his book had done. Rutak did notice something at the end of the book, a small paper envelope. Wiping the tears from her cheeks, she gently opened it, removing its contents of a universal solid-state storage device and a printed photo. Looking at the photo, it was of a metal arch and wire fence around a series of brick buildings. There were some human letters above the arch. Albeit Magfreit. On the back of the photo was a single human phrase in a language her translator could recognize. Lest we forget. The storage device had something Rutak wasn't expecting. Buildings similar to that in the photo, except they were of his people architecture, made of mason stone blocks. The fences were pressed by Greentext of varying ages. Rutak sat in silence, alone. Arthur had left a few hours ago, leaving Rutak to sit in her own thoughts and worries. What should I do? Should I do anything? I can't just pretend that this doesn't exist. Her mind was running wild, the fears of being detained, not being able to see her children, her family. Should she risk everything for the well-being of a people she didn't know? She knew something like this would happen. She didn't expect it so soon. Rutak cried again.